record and even let people in as they try to get admitted. So we, as you know, have been reading the Manual for Teachers, and we're in one of well, what is certainly the largest section within the Manual for Teachers, called the characteristics of God's teachers. And in the previous session, we went over trust, the foundation for all of the characteristics of God's teachers. So I think about this as character growth that all people that work A Course in Miracles or any spiritual program can aspire to. It unfolds with experience over time. These are not things that necessarily come easy to anyone because they are growth experiences. And every single one of them that we read about is not what I would initially have expected it to say about that characteristic, which is common with many things in the Course, that it has its own take on the message. And with that, hello and welcome to Miracles on High Plains. My name is Jonica, and our reader today is Julie C.
Honesty. All other traits of God's teachers rest on trust. Once that has been achieved, the others cannot fail to follow. Only the trusting can afford honesty, for only they can see its value. Honesty does not apply only to what you say. The term actually means consistency. There is nothing you say that contradicts what you think or do. No thought opposes any other thought. No act belies your word, and no word lacks agreement with another. Such are the truly honest. At no level are they in conflict with themselves. Therefore, it is impossible for them to be in conflict with anyone or anything.
Mm-hmm. So all other traits depend on trust. Once one develops a level of trust, the other characteristics cannot fail to follow. Honesty being the next, and these are very seemingly sequence dependent. So honesty follows naturally from trust, but the spirit interprets the honesty in terms of consistency. Sometimes, or I used to often think of this as integrity. Do what you say what you do. It's consistent. There's not internal conflicts, but this also goes to even in your private life, things that nobody sees or hears, so that you don't have conflicting beliefs, conflicting feelings, so that, and why is this important? Because for a mind to be at peace, you cannot have internal conflicts raging within your own being. And so the honesty is a very attractive feature. Now, we mean consistency that is centered on truth and the laws of healing, the laws of forgiveness. Obviously, we don't mean consistently egotistical. We mean consistently forgiving. So no thought opposes any other thought, or no word lacks agreement with another. This is definitely a more advanced attribute, and it's fundamental to an experience of inner peace, because at no level is the perfectly honest person, at no level are they in conflict with themselves. And you might recall that it says right in chapter 1 of the textbook that inner conflict is the basic problem of human experience, is a conflicted self. Sandra?
Yeah, just to add a little bit, which is the opposite of trust is fear. And so if I'm in a trusting place, that's a much, much more happy, peaceful place. If I'm in a fearful place, that's the ego. But just nice to be able to just know that if I'm not trusting, I'm in the ego.
I think that's very consistent. And it will talk about, we're going to encounter very shortly specific statements about entertaining doubts. It might be in the next paragraph.
The peace of mind which the advanced teachers of God experience is largely due to their perfect honesty. It is only the wish to deceive that makes for war. No one at one with himself can even conceive of conflict. Conflict is the inevitable result of self-deception, and self-deception is dishonesty. There is no challenge to a teacher of God. Challenge implies doubt, and the trust on which God's teachers rest secure makes doubt impossible. Therefore, they can only succeed. In this, as in all things, they are honest. They can only succeed because they never do their will alone. They choose for all mankind, for all the world and all things in it, for the unchanging and unchangeable, beyond appearances, and for the Son of God and his Creator. How could they not succeed? They choose in perfect honesty, sure of their choice as of themselves.
So note that right at the top, the peace of mind which the advanced teachers of God experience is largely due to perfect honesty. We are talking about the upper rungs on the ladder of ascension. And that's not to say that any one of us cannot experience a degree of these characteristics wherever we're at, but to consistently practice these things in all our affairs requires a more advanced approach. And this is what I really like about the Course of Miracles, because it always comes back to one's self-concept, one's no, Socrates said, know thyself. And what we mean is know that you are as God created you, your eternal self. So in this context, we mean self-honesty is to be in touch with and clear about your eternal nature. So no one at one with his true self can even conceive of conflict. Conflict, which is introduced by the ego, is a form of self-deception, self-distortion, self-failure to perceive the true self and substitute instead an illusory self. That kind of self-deception is inconsistent with your true nature. Therefore, in this context, self-deception is dishonesty. Let's say it another way. To think of yourself as an ego is to invite inner conflict with your true self and is a form of warfare with your true self. It's dishonest, unfaithful to your true self. So This is very different than the world would teach. And true self knowledge, I am as God created me, uh, is free of doubts, is confident not in one's ego or littleness, but is confident in the power that resides within them, and so they cannot be challenged. It rests secure and makes doubt impossible. That's to say that you don't doubt creation, you don't doubt God's plan for creation, that your part is essential in God's plan for salvation, and that every counter you have is an opportunity for a teaching learning experience. And then it says something that is truly transcendent. About the teachers of God who are honest. They can only succeed because they never do their will alone. They choose for everyone, meaning their choices are centered not in little self-determination, what's in it for me and me alone, but they make choices that are for helpful to the good of all concerned. And apparently, this extends for all the world and all the things in it in ways that the human mind would normally not be fully conscious of, but they choose within a context of why we are here. Why are we here? We are here to fulfill our function in God's plan for salvation. How could they not succeed when they choose to fulfill their function in God's plan for salvation? So honesty is consistency, is free of inner conflict. Then we go, so we said these characteristics build upon one another. Then we go on to tolerance.
Tolerance. God's teachers do not judge. To judge is to be dishonest, for to judge is to assume a position you do not have. Judgment without self-deception is impossible. Judgment implies that you have been deceived in your brothers. How then could you not have been deceived in yourself? Judgment implies a lack of trust, and trust remains the bedrock of the teacher of God's whole thought system. Let this be lost, and all his learning goes. Without judgment are all things equally acceptable, for who could judge otherwise? Without judgment are all men brothers, for who is there who stands apart? Judgment destroys honesty and shatters trust. No teacher of God can judge and hope to learn.
So these characteristics are interrelated and then introduced in a sequence. So judgment is a form of dishonesty. I want to elaborate on that. Judgment is a form of self-deception. What? Let me explain. The self-honesty is to recognize I am as God created me. I am here in this form, in time and space, to play my part in God's plan for salvation. I have a function which is essential to God's plan for salvation. That's why I am here. And I know that while I'm here, my function is not to be judging people, not to formulate opposition in my mind and then project it out onto other people. So, an honest person that knows this because they know themselves, they're the reason why they are here, and they choose not to judge. Should set on the side, this is a very advanced stage. This can take for a lifetime to be reach the point where you surrender the prerogative of judging for yourself and instead trust that the Holy Spirit's judgment is the only judgment that is necessary, and that you surrender the prerogative to judge by yourself separately and by yourself. Um, Otherwise, to exercise self judgment is to be deceived in yourself and to be deceived in your brothers. It implies a lack of trust. And we can go on to say more about what the experience is like to be free of judgment, where all things become acceptable. But it's really more important to realize at this stage in learning of the consequences of unconsciously assuming that you need to be the one to do the judging. That has consequences that are obstacles to peace and obstacles to love. To be deceived in yourself and in others is an obstacle to life. Sandra?
Would you say that judgment is self-deception because it's based in separation?
Yes.
Okay.
It's based on not knowing what you are and why you're here. The Course teaches that the Holy Spirit sees everything and knows everything, and therefore, and is loving, and therefore can make a correct assessment of what should be done in any given situation. You or I, at best, have a partial understanding, don't even fully recognize our own role and purpose here, much less what somebody else is up to. So we have this very fragmented view, separate view, and then we attempt to make a judgment based on that limited knowledge. That's pure self-deception. That's just in my words, mouthing off opinions when we really don't know any what's true at all. So we should say this is simply a mistake. We have all have practiced judgment without knowing the consequences of it. Put in Course terms, judgment is a miscreation. It's using the power of your mind to do that which you were never intended to do, to be judge of yourself and of others. So yes, Sandra, it's a direct extension of feeling separate, believing you're separate from creation. Lauren?
Yeah, so you said something about the Holy Spirit's judgment is the only judgment that's necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I always think of judgment as a negative.
Mm-hmm.
When you judge people, usually it's a negative thing.
Mm-hmm.
So is it the Holy Spirit's understanding or assessment, or is it truly the Holy Spirit's judgment?
Yeah, we would call it, yes, we do typically think of judgment as negative. So can we call that ego judgment, mean judgment?
Okay.
The Holy Spirit exercises judgment as kind, gentle, and loving judgment. So it's judgment done for the purposes of bringing about maximal good for everybody concerned, of which the ego does not use judgment in that way. It uses judgment for the purposes of harming, destroying, comparing, etc. And by the way, this topic is so misunderstood by many course students. Partly because some of the early comments about judgment, people think there's no place for judgment in God's creation. When what the course teaches is there's no place for ego judgment in God's creation. There is definitely a place for loving judgment in God's creation. The challenge is that we've never heard of loving judgment before. We've only heard of the critical version. And so this is where we didn't really know there was such a thing as judging in the best interest of everybody. As it says, judging in a way that all things are equally acceptable. Heather, you had your hand up?
Yeah, there's another place in the course. I love that it clarifies this. It says that you're dishonest when you judge because you cannot judge. It says not because you should not. It says you cannot. And you cannot because we cannot see the whole picture that the Holy Spirit sees, what's going on with this other person, all the things involved with that. So it's dishonest because we only have a partial picture. We have no idea the bigger context. So she knows how to assess the bigger context. That's why she can only judge righteous judgment. We have no access to that.
Yes. And therefore, the mistake of assuming that we can do those things shows clearly how self-deceived we are. Kind of a physical analogy would be to think you can fly a helicopter or think you can perform brain surgery on somebody. Oh, here, I could do it. When, in fact, that is self-deception. Let's take some more comments. Noelle?
It seems to me that learning to let go of the negative judgment is a lifelong learning. And it's something to aspire to for certain, but it also seems to me that if we curtail whatever help we can give to other people, because in my own estimation, I continue to judge, that's not helpful either.
Correct. Yes. So let me speak to a minute of elaborate some on what Noelle's saying. Let's say there's a person that I've encountered and they clearly are in need of some help. And then I think to myself, well, who am I to decide what they need? Maybe, I shouldn't do anything here because I don't know what they need. And this is tricky. What the Course teaches is the Holy Spirit has an answer, and in that very moment is guiding you. And so here would be my advice: when you're aware that you don't have the answer, but the Holy Spirit does, you do the best you can. No one can ask of you more than to do your best. And so it literally is a step of faith forward that while I'm not certain of myself, here's the best that I can do right now. And if I get a better idea comes to my mind, then I'll do that. but I'm not going to withdraw from a call for help simply because of my own doubts and uncertainties. And practicing this is what part of what I refer to as the art of miracles. This is not black and white. You have to step forward in faith. What is a step forward in faith but a step where you don't know fully what's going to happen? And you're willing to acknowledge that you don't have all the answers, but you're also willing to work with your inner guidance and listening. It means you still continue to listen as you step forward. And so these things need to be experienced. We can talk about it here in theory, but the experience of it is a great teacher. Sandra?
Yeah, for me, all this made me fall in love with the Holy Spirit because I judge. And and this book says you're gonna judge, but you can't because you can't see the whole picture. But Holy Spirit can judge. So it just when I turn it over to the Holy Spirit, um, and I wait, there's that trust in the unknown because I don't always get an answer right away. So I just trust. I turned it over. I did what I was told to do. So now I got to trust that everything's going to be okay and that I'll be guided. And it's just been that just doing that function of turning it over to the Holy Spirit when I do catch myself judging, which is all the time. It's helped me to stop judging. It's helped me to have faith in the Holy Spirit. It's helped me to have faith in myself. It just has helped me. I just love it. I love the Holy Spirit because it takes me off the hook.
Yes, takes you off the hook. Um, I think this is worth pausing for another moment. What Sandra just said, it takes you off the hook. Let's say a friend calls you up and says, I'm thinking about killing myself tonight. Is there anything you can tell me that I should know? Well, if you think you have the answer to that, you are self-deceived. But in that moment, you have a choice of, do you listen for spirit guidance? Do you acknowledge that you don't know what to say or do, but that there is a voice within you that can be helpful? And then be willing to trust that inner voice enough to share what comes to mind. I think this has happened to me before. And these, perhaps in your life, it won't be as dramatic as that playing out. But basically, every time somebody comes to you asking, indicating that they need help, is a similar situation. It's just the context of it is not the same, maybe doesn't catch your attention as strongly, but still is a case of what you're needed. A miracle is called for, but whose judgment are you going to lean on for guidance in that moment? Where are you going to put your faith? In your own abilities or in the inner voice within you? And these things must be experienced. We can talk about the mechanics of it in a session like this, but firsthand experience is a great teacher. All right, let's go on.
Gentleness. Harm is impossible for God's teachers. They can neither harm nor be harmed. Harm is the outcome of judgment. It is the dishonest act that follows a dishonest thought. It is a verdict of guilt upon a brother. and therefore on oneself. It is the end of peace and the denial of learning. It demonstrates the absence of God's curriculum and its replacement by insanity. No teacher of God but must learn, and fairly early in his training, that harmfulness completely obliterates his function from his awareness. It will make him confused, fearful, angry, and suspicious. It will make the Holy Spirit's lessons impossible to learn. Nor can God's teacher be heard at all, except by those who realize that harm can actually achieve nothing. No gain can come of it.
So I realize there's some ABCs here. It took me years to kind of work them out. By ABCs, what I mean related to judgment. But it's actually a pretty simple formula that is found in the Course. And it begins with the ego is bent on finding guilt in the world. And it doesn't matter if it finds it in you, or it finds it in your family members, or in people that you have never met. It's looking for guilt. It's bent on guilt. And once it seeks out and pays attention to any indicators that might support guilt, and then once it finds them, it makes a judgment. I've found the guilty one. And it snaps. By the way, this process can be done unconsciously and very quickly without, I'm explaining it in words over minutes, but the mind can do so instinctually. If you see a person holding a knife, you might immediately assume they're out to use it against somebody and make a judgment. Maybe that's too dramatic of an example, but this is what I mean. You immediately assume trouble. So it sees the evidence and then immediately makes a judgment that the person is in fact guilty. After all, the ego was looking for guilt, and now it's found evidence. And so it quickly makes a judgment that the person is guilty. And the next logical step in that is, what is the penalty or the punishment that that person should endure for as a result of being guilty? And that's where an attack thought comes to mind. How should this person pay for their guilt? And it might just be that you choose to view them as evil, or you want nothing to do with them. You distance them. I'm so glad I'm not like one of them, that I'm better than them. These are all the ego process of looking for guilt, making judgment, and then using the mind as a weapon to oppose the other person. This is the opposite of a holy relationship, obviously, but y'all know what I'm talking about. This is instinctual in human experience. And then there's goes on to the punishment. So maybe I'm going to curse the person, or maybe I'm going to tell them off to their face, or maybe I'm going to be emotionally attack the person, or psychologically oppose the person, and in some instances, physically attack the person. All those are still manifestations of attack thoughts. The mind decides what to do, what punishment is deserving, and then and then it goes from there. So all this is a plan to hurt others in one form or another. And it should be honest that anyone engages in that is self-deceived, has forgotten that they are created by God and here for a holy purpose, and has lost sight of that and is completely caught up in the ego illusion. This is why, to a teacher of God, harm is impossible. They've seen through all that ego illusion that I just spoke about, which is widely practiced in the world. They've seen through it, and they realize this is the outcome of judgment, whether it's physically implemented or just mentally considered. And so it's a dishonest harm is a dishonest act which follows a dishonest thought that is the result of a verdict of guilty upon a brother, which little did anyone realize, but that verdict of guilty is really a verdict of guilt upon oneself, because one has decided that they are here for to judge and to hurt. So this is what the ego believes. This is the unrecognized motivation behind all violence. Susie?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that for me, the characteristic of gentleness is, you know, if I'm going to somebody for help and, you know, I'm not in the role of the teacher, you know, in this world, let's say, you know, whatever. When somebody is gentle and kind of, that's what that comes up for me. I can feel that lack of judgment, right? I can just feel that they're just gentle. I don't know. And it's very, for me, it's one of the most important things if I'm going to talk with somebody about something that's going on with me. That gentleness makes me feel safe.
Yes.
Yeah. And yeah, I love this characteristic because I think it's like, there's some kind of authenticity about a gentle person,
Yes.
you know? Yeah. So I just wanted to add that. And then on the flip side, I can tell immediately if somebody's, you know, judging me, that gentleness is just not there.
Yes.
Yeah. That's all.
Uh-huh. Thank you. Here's an example that might be helpful. I saw a clip from a movie where a man was taking out a woman on a first date, trying to be impressive, fine restaurants and all that. And he was very, you know, he had all the money and all the accoutrements of a successful, good-looking guy dating a good-looking woman. And they're having dinner together. And when the waiter came by and made a mistake, he lashed out at the waiter with a viciousness, and she caught it. She recognized that if he treats the waiter that way, well, that's the way he practices treating people. And she got up and left. It was dinner over because of the way he had treated the waiter. She wasn't going to have it. And so this speaks to the second attribute, which is honesty and consistency. The way you treat any one person is the way you treat people. It doesn't matter their status. They could be the busboy coming by to take the dirty dishes off the table. they're still a human being. The way you regard them is the way you regard people in an honest life. And so I found that to be a really nice illustration of both gentleness and honesty. Sandra?
Yeah, it's also the way they regard themselves.
Yes.
And it's usually been programmed into them to be like that.
Yes.
Because some people don't have any role models of gentleness whatsoever in their life. And so I would just encourage people to have compassion for even those who are lashing out.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. They're really underneath all that is really a cry for love. The Course teaches us a person that's lashing out, underneath it is pain and a cry for love. It's just expressed in a form that is difficult to see the truth in them. It's a defensive mechanism that attacks others because they feel so fragile and vulnerable themselves. Let's go on.
Therefore, God's teachers are wholly gentle. They need the strength of gentleness, for it is in this that the function of salvation becomes easy. To those who would do harm, it is impossible. To those to whom harm has no meaning, it is merely natural. What choice but this has meaning to the sane? Who chooses hell when perceives a way to heaven? And who would choose the weakness that must come from harm in place of the unfailing, all-encompassing, and limitless strength of gentleness? The might of God's teachers lies in their gentleness, for they have understood their evil thoughts came neither from God's Son nor his Creator. Thus did they join their thoughts with him, who is their source. And so their will, which always was his own, is free to be itself.
Mm-hmm. Going back to that example that I cited about the man and the woman at dinner, who would choose, a man who's presenting himself as successful and confident and a very fine person, who would choose the weakness that must come from harm? What kind of confident man would lash out at a waiter for making an error? But it's an indication of deep down inside, it's an indication of someone that is themselves very insecure and doesn't understand the nature of human experience, who certainly hasn't acquired a sense of gentleness. And so I think Susie's comment about admiring and recognizing gentleness in another person, this would be what I would encourage you to do. Look for those people that express gentleness in your life when you encounter them. See how it feels when you're around them. Take note of the way they are in their interactions. And so the Course teaches us again and again, if you're looking for it, you're more likely to notice it and thus to appreciate it. And once you appreciate it, you can understand it and identify with that part of yourself. So what we haven't said yet in this section is all these attributes lie deep within you, kind of like seeds that have been planted but may not have grown up into full-blown plants as yet. They lie waiting to be nourished, to be watered and encouraged along. They all lie within you. And part of the experience of opening to these attributes is to look for them, to understand them, and to identify, even if it's a little fragment within yourself, where you notice these attributes arising within you. And this is how you invite these characteristics to grow within you. Okay, it's not my intent that we do all of the attributes today. So let's do one more.
Joy. Joy is the inevitable result of gentleness. Gentleness means that fear is now impossible, and what could come to interfere with joy? The open hands of gentleness are always filled. The gentle have no pain. They cannot suffer. Why would they not be joyous? They are sure they are beloved and must be safe. Joy goes with gentleness as surely as grief attends attack. God's teachers trust in him, and they are sure his teacher goes before them, making sure no harm can come to them. They hold his gifts and follow in his way because God's voice directs them in all things. Joy is their song of thanks, and Christ looks down on them in thanks as well. His need of them is just as great as theirs of him. How joyous it is to share the purpose of salvation.
So I want to again draw your attention to how each of these characteristics builds upon the previous ones, how it's a progressive plan. The Course would say there are conditions whereby these characteristics emerge, and you must have the foundations in place for the further characteristics to emerge. So trust and honesty being the beginnings become the foundations for which further characteristics emerge. So joy is inevitable as a result of gentleness. What does gentleness imply? That fear is now no longer entertained by the mind. Inner conflicts, whether it be emotional, psychological, or intellectual conflicts within, have been resolved, have been undone. The battle with the ego is no longer underway because one has simply dismissed all notions of confusion around ego identification and ego idols, ego value structures. One has dismissed all that. And so there's no longer a battle, and fear is now impossible. And as a result of those conditions, joy emerges naturally. So I remember I was living in Asheville, North Carolina in 2013 and attending Course in Miracle meetings there. And I made it a commitment to myself to that I'm not finished with this journey in miracles until I find joy. It was the highest bar I could think of at the time, was to be joyful. And so I made a commitment to myself in a quest for joy. First of all, to understand, what is it? How does it come about? Where's it come from? What turns out it's already within you. The existential, eternal nature of your being is inherently loving and joyful. Inherently. But there are obstacles in the confusion about the ego and the illusions of time and space create obstacles to the expression of that joy. Remove the obstacles and the expression happens naturally. It's the inevitable result of removing the obstacles. In this case, the result of gentleness, which in itself is the result of having removed conflicts and finding inner peace. And so there is, these are the laws of healing. There is a systematic sequence in which the obstacles are undone, removed, and freed. And as we do so, attributes of the spirit naturally, inevitably express themselves. Having understood or begun to understand the laws, you still must practice and have the experience yourself. It's not enough to just simply know it in your mind. It also requires experience. And then with those experiences, you will find inevitably, well, you're not quite there yet. And there's opportunity for more undoing and more obstacles to be removed. And that's what the healing journey looks like. Step by step, moving forward, removing the unnecessary idols and illusions that we had made for ourselves. Sandra?
Yeah, what I love about this paragraph is his need of them is just as great as theirs of him. And I love that equanimity. And it's like God's plan for salvation is not going to happen without us doing our work. And I don't mean just Course in Miracles people. I mean anybody who's aspiring to the unity principles of oneness.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and sees that this whole dualistic of right and wrong, war and peace, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. It's not sustainable. It leads to self-destruction. The only thing that is sustainable is if we do our work, and that's what God needs of us, is for us to do our work so we can evolve and stop this nonsense. I'm complete.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, it is true. I'm feeling like that's a good pause point here. There are, there's all these characteristics. It can be a little overwhelming to try to consume them all in a single setting. It would be better if you spend a little time reviewing the parts that spoke to you, or the parts where you identify some of yourself emerging, or maybe some barriers. These are more advanced qualities, so please don't allow ego thoughts of self-criticism to come in and compare yourself, your current status in healing with what's talked about here. Think of these more as the light at the end of the tunnel, but that these are attributes already within you that allow you to express who you truly are. You truly are created for joy. We were never created for war and for harm and for dishonesty or for distrust. We were created for joy. And so all the more reason, after having reviewed these, that you be motivated to remove the obstacles that stand in the way of the expression of your true self. So, Jeff, you had your hand up?
Yeah, Jonica, something came up for me in this class tonight, and I don't know if I should bring it up in the group. Do you have a few minutes?
I can
Um,
stay on. I can stay on. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So I think we'll take a pause there. If you did not uh, read about trust, or even if you did attend the session the other day, recommend you go back there because as we saw tonight, all this is founded upon trusting not on your ego guidance, but trusting on spirit guidance. That is the fundamental inner shift that needs to occur in order to open the door for these other characteristics to emerge. And so it does help me to get clear in my mind so I'm not as confused as I was in my mind. And then once my mind is more clear, it makes it possible to access those parts that transcend the intellect, transcend the ordinary consciousness, and go deeper into where the truth has always been. So thank you, Julie, for reading. We'll finish this section on characteristics in our next session. I hope that you can join us. And God bless you all. Namaste.
Namaste. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Namaste. Thank you, everyone.
Hey, and Zoom worked today.
Thank you, Yannicka.
You're welcome. Did I already? No, I didn't.